Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I'm really looking forward to my conversation today with my guest, Rachel Steinman, who is someone that I've been connected with on Facebook for some time. We were just saying, I don't even know how or when it started, but it's like so much of social media, we tend to find the right people who we want to connect with. And I've wanted Rachel on the show for a while, and I'm so grateful that she's taking some time out of her day today to connect. We have so much in common already that we've discussed, and I know this is going to really be a conversation that's going to, for me, be valuable. Hopefully for all the listeners who's hearing it, it's what they need to hear right now. So Rachel, thank you so much. And please introduce yourself and let the audience know what has been your journey and what has led you to where you are in the world and the work that you're doing and what you're putting out and giving to others.
Well, thank you so much for reaching out, Jory. And I feel like we have an immediate connection, which is really special. And you and I are both on, it seems like, similar patterns or paths,
Yes.
Which is to find healing and help others and connect with others. And we're both podcasters. And I'm grateful you reached out. So again, my name is Rachel Steinman, and I am an LA native, actually a Valley girl, grew up in the San Fernando Valley during the height of Valley girlism, raising second generation Valley girls. Thought I'd never move back to the Valley, but I absolutely love it. I'm always, once a teacher, always a teacher, but I got my teaching credentials from UCLA and my master's in education. And I taught for many years, mostly kindergarten, first grade. And then I had two beautiful daughters and I was substitute teaching. And when I hit 40 years old, my grandfather's third wife passed away. And at that point in my life, I was having a hard time with my mom, who has bipolar, but wasn't diagnosed yet. And she was just, being inappropriate and manic and then depressive and causing issues. And I was kind of at that point of questioning a little bit my own sanity, nothing major, but just, wondering, am I going to inherit this? And cut to, I turned 40 and my grandmother, I call her Grandma Susie, but she wasn't blood related. She was my grandpa's third wife, passed away. And I was allowed to go into the high rise that my grandfather jumped from when I was 16 years old. So for the past 24 years, I wondered, why would somebody who had his physical health to still golf and play tennis and had family and grandkids that loved him and had money in the bank or so I thought, and was successful real estate mogul, and why would somebody do something like this? And I had my chance to find out when I discovered an incomplete manuscript in that apartment. And it really opened up a lot of questions, actually, because it was about 4 family suicides. My grandfather, his wife, which was my mom's mom. So that means my mom, both of her parents died by suicide, and she was orphaned by suicide. And then also my grandfather's father died by suicide during the Great Depression when he lost his fortune. And my great uncle died by suicide because I think he was a closeted gay. And there were a lot of kind of openings in the story, but a ton of missing pages. And for about 3 years, I just sat on it and just thought, I know that there's a story here, but I don't know really, if I want to jump into it, because I took it to a few family members and they said, oh my God, don't read that. That's from, walk away. But I couldn't. And I knew that I needed to do some digging and uncovering and understanding my family so I could understand my mom, therefore understand myself, therefore cut the generational trauma. And I just started by taking his notes, and, he wrote them back in the 80s. So I had to transcribe them onto the computer. And then I started, and tons missing because he left it for a ghostwriter, which is the irony, right? Because it wasn't completely, some of it was typed out. His business of 50 years of business, that had all been typed out, but his personal stuff was left in notebooks. And I just started taking UCLA writing classes and started writing my own story, and realized that I had a lot of the similar shame and that my grandfather experienced about his father's mental health. And then he never talked about his wife, who likely had bipolar, that my mom inherited. And as we know, trauma triggers even, harsher, sometimes mental health challenges. And my mom was only 14 when she found her mom, who had overdosed with pills and alcohol, at their home up in Scarsdale. She grew up with a lot of money, and my mom ran from money because she thought, look, you can have money and be miserable. I don't need money. But she was really running from her own mental health challenges. Right. And here I am with two daughters, semi-hormonal, wondering like, oh my God, is this ticking time bomb coming for me? What can I do? And I just started writing, and I started writing a memoir, which is, I'm still working on. It's going to, at this point, be almost a decade in the making, because it spans 5 generations and is one of the hardest but most rewarding things I've ever done. Cut to, I then wrote some essays and posted them on Medium, which is a blogging site that anyone can write on, but other people can discover it. And in my own little world, I went viral for my first essay about what I wish I could have told my grandfather and Anthony Bourdain. And people came out of the woodwork and said, wait, Rachel, really? You were like, had all the boyfriends, you were popular, you did well in school. I had no idea you were having these issues. And my family has this, and people started opening up. And as you know, when you're vulnerable and you open up and you share, it's really hard at first, but then it's like magic. People open up to you, and it's this connection. And I realized, literally, Jory, I could walk up, you too, could walk up to anybody in the supermarket or on the street or at a gas station. Everyone has a family story. You may not have mental health, but it affects you. And I just wanted to cut that generational trauma. And so I was asked to be a guest on a few podcasts, and I thought, this is such an intimate, amazing medium. I want to try doing this myself. And I started with my brother, and my brother is episode 1. And he was a homeless drug addict because he had ADHD, and he was captain of the football team, really good looking guy. Everyone loved him, but he went undiagnosed with a mental health condition and self-medicated. And then, having a mom that had bipolar and all these things, he ended up living out of his car until it was repossessed. I know I'm talking a lot. I'm about to come to the end.
No, please.
But keep going. But and the best news is, he's sober now, and has a successful business called Jane Motorcycles. It's this lifestyle brand. They do coffee and they do motorcycle apparel, and they're so hip and cool. It's ridiculous. And he's thriving. And so, but I'm just so happy to be able to talk about these things so that my daughters know we have addiction in our family. We have ADHD. We have bipolar. We have OCD. We have all of these things. If there's an issue, let's talk about it before. Let's catch it early. And that was my point. Yeah. And then since then, I've been volunteering for National Alliance on Mental Health and using my teaching credentials to go into middle schools and high schools and talk about warning signs. And it's just been this really incredible journey of mental health advocacy. And the truth is, what it ended up doing is saving my mom and my relationship, because my mom subsequently, bipolar never goes away. She has gone into a mental health institution. She's recently just had another bipolar incident that causes some issues, and it requires family support. It requires people to be there to catch them and be understanding. And I don't think I could have been had I not gone through this, because, it's so much of mental health is invisible, and you just think, come on, get your shit together, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And then once you realize that it's a true mental health condition, then you find that compassion. And that's been finding compassion for myself too, because I was so judgmental of my mom and, and so all of those things.
Wow. Oh, Rachel, thank you for sharing all of that. I know you said, I'm talking. No, keep talking. Like this is,
it's a lot.
Things that, well, it is a lot. And I love what you are doing of trying to kind of put the puzzle pieces together, because it's so easy in today's snapshot of time to just take a look at what's happening right now and not have context, or not have understanding, or not have curiosity to how did I get to the way that I am? And if I can understand where I came from, then I can understand where I'm going, and I can be more informed around patterns and around things that can get passed on in our DNA. And I can be more understanding of, if I start this habit, I can have that awareness go on and say, is this intentional in my response? And how do I support myself or my other family members who I might see these things? And so many people don't have a desire to put the pieces together, because it can be more trauma inducing, more shame inducing. It can be fearful. It can feel overwhelming. So it's kind of opening a Pandora's box. That sounds like once you started, you couldn't close.
Yeah, I developed TMJ. I was like having, I say, it's like I purposely was kicking up dirt and digging up ghosts and and going back into my own past and examining it. It was like, but that's therapeutic. Sometimes it's you have to do the hard work to get up to the top of the hill to be able to look out and get that breeze and go, okay, I understand. I have a better view. And so absolutely. Yeah. But I think it's worth doing.
Yeah. For the listeners of the show, they've heard a lot of my story, but for the sake of our conversation, I'm going to share a little bit, because then I'd like to go into some of these things a little bit more. I come from a family in which there's so much trauma, and it goes back generations, and how it plays out in family dynamics for certain aspects of family dynamics that are willing and able to see what's trauma informed, or those stuck developmentally based on the traumas, versus some other family members that are more open and willing to talk about it from a healing space, which is really an interesting dynamic, because those kind of move forward in that space of healing is kind of also a point of privilege to be able to be unstuck from the trauma. And some of the family trauma in my family, it goes back, over a century with what we see going on in the Ukraine right now. That was my great grandmother. She got pushed out of her village in, I believe it was actually, I don't know if it was technically now it would be Ukraine, but Bolshevik Revolution, her home was burned. So my great grandmother, by 9 years old, she was orphaned and raised by her grandparents. After the Bolshevik Revolution, her grandparents commit suicide. Well, that's the belief of the story, that they commit suicide. She immigrates to America and has my mom's mom and two other boys. When my mom was 16, my mom and her dad, so my mom's parents, were killed in a car accident. They were 38 years old, hit by a drunk driver head on. They were killed. My mom was the only survivor of the accident. The irony, or more trauma, is my mom's dad, he was orphaned. Both of his parents had died from a young age. And then my mom has me and my siblings. My parents divorced when I was 3. My dad commits suicide when I was 10. So I go back 100 years of orphans and trauma. And from my mom's side, it was both her mom's and her dad's side in which this trauma is so strong. And how I've begun to do my own healing, mostly post-divorce. I got divorced as the same age as my mom was, and she got divorced, and really seeing I have a choice in my paths, and really wanting to break the generational patterns of what it means to be trauma informed for my own daughters. And that comes at a risk at times, because to break family patterns may not be accepted by all family members, because it can be either a point of privilege to break some of the patterns, or it might challenge relationships that have been held together by trauma bonding and certain belief sets or belief systems of, well, we are an enmeshed family out of safety and security because that's what we do when there's trauma. Individuation is not always supported because that feels threatening. And it's just, these are so ingrained in family patterns. And so how have you really communicated to your daughters what you're trying to do in uncovering all this work, and what benefit? Because that to me is where the gold is, right? I can process this from my past, but how do I help you guys moving forward so I can show up differently for you, so you have more freedoms, more individuation, less fear, less anxiety, whatever it may show up as, mental health challenges?
So I'm going to definitely get to that question in a second. I just also want to say that my great grandparents also came from Ukraine area, Kiev, lost homes. And, you know, there's a lot of new and very exciting science being done on epigenetics and how we inherit the, you know, it actually literally changes our DNA, stress and trauma. And you and I are both Jewish. I laugh, and I think I can say this, like, there are so many neurotic Jews. I wonder if it's like the neuroses has been passed down, because
I believe so.
I just think it's so interesting, you know, when especially when I talk to other Jewish families, you know, there's so much of that. I mean, there's anxiety in every family, but there's definitely things that have been passed down. The other little point that I wanted to just point out, just for your listeners, because I just learned this a few years ago, is that I don't say commit suicide anymore. And by the way, I'm very sorry to hear about your dad. That I can't even imagine that you were only 10. I'm so sorry. What I say now is I say die by suicide, because commit has such a negative connotation, like commit a crime or so I just, you know, because I think language is so important.
Language is so powerful.
It's so important. And that's why I say my mom has bipolar, not my mom is bipolar, just like I wouldn't say my mom has heart disease. So, you know, these are things that like kind of help me reframe things and again, find that compassion about suicide. You know, he died by suicide because he was constant suicide ideation and so much pain, those kinds of things. Back to your question about my daughters and what I want them to know. And I think, you know, the best we can do as parents, and I guess I'll say as an educator, is to model it. And I'm modeling it by talking about it and not having shame, and letting them see like, oh, okay, well, my mom is talking about some of these things that, you know, others would kind of keep buried family secrets, because it's freeing. And, you know, the truth is, and in my memoir, there's a lot of sexuality. There's a lot of things that like I wasn't ready for my daughters to read. They still haven't read it. I say like maybe when they're 18, and the youngest one will probably be there in a year and a half. And, you know, but on the other side, the flip side is this generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're so open to talking about mental health. I mean, the irony is that they're suffering from it at greater numbers. And that's probably just because they're not getting outside and exercising, and they're addicted to their phones and the pandemic
and
all of those things that we know that, you know, we really messed our kids up by cutting them off for 2 years from friends, and all of those things but they are, my daughters can easily talk about, oh, Grammy's bipolar, or, no problem talking about it. And I think the idea of going to therapy or getting help or being on medication does not feel as shameful as it did for our generation, let alone our parents' generation. So that's the good news. But yeah,
can I comment on one thing about that really
please,
quick?
Yeah.
I think this is I think it is so normalized for this generation. I agree. And I see that with my daughters and their cohorts. And I think there's a risk to that a little bit, is the language can get overused in a way that is not clinical.
Absolutely.
And both of my daughters have experienced depression at different times. And when my youngest was first feeling it, it was really challenging, obviously for many reasons. And when we took her to the doctor, one of the first questions the doctor asked was, is there suicide in the family? And before I could finish the sentence of saying, yes, my dad commits suicide, she was already writing a prescription, because we don't want to take any risks of not addressing the genetic component of depression and what the risks could be with that. But what I was going to say as a result is, I remember after she came out of that depression and in middle school, would get really offended when she would hear kids say, oh, I'm so depressed, but would use it in a flippant way, because she'd be like, you have no idea. Don't say you're depressed just because your mom won't let you go out or you got a bad grade on a test. Like, that's not depression. You can be bummed, you can be sad, but there was a period of time where she really wanted to advocate for helping teens understand, like, you have no idea unless you know. And that's don't minimize it. And again, language is really powerful. And to be able to not be afraid to say to people, yeah, I'm on antidepressants because it doesn't have to be this hard, and I'm getting support. And here's the tools that I'm able to now access as a result of being on medication to help my brain do something my brain may not be wired to do on its own.
I 100% agree.
I feel like that's one of the benefits of this generation, is there's freedoms of acceptance, period, right? I mean, look at how from the time that we were in high school, how much more acceptable it is to be different. Whereas in high school, any kind of difference was going to be something that would get you teased or made fun of. And now differences are being celebrated in the best ways possible.
Absolutely. But kids also don't want to be stigmatized, and they don't. Right. And because, but I 100% agree with you about the overuse of language, like throwing out the word OCD or I'm so anxious. Like, there's actual clinical, I'm not a psychiatrist or even a psychologist or a social worker. I'm just here to share my own personal experiences. But, I've learned so much, and I have to watch my own language when I'm talking about somebody that's not clinically maybe anxious or clinically maybe depressed. And yeah, right. It's definitely important to be mindful.
Yeah. And with the family members, was there any resistance of people having you dig deep into the family story? How did that play out?
So yes. And the truth is that when the memoir comes out, some names will be changed, but I was most concerned about my mom. And because I'm writing about her life, and some of that is her mistakes. And she was really worried at first, and it kind of pushed her into a little manic episode. And then I put out this essay, and she came back to me and she said, I give you my blessing. And wow, if I can help others, this is what I wanted to do. And, I'm talking about
that took a lot of courage for her.
It did. I'm talking about her promiscuity, her drug use, all of these things that you do when you're manic, unfortunately. And, without necessarily saying like, can I do this? I was so scared to put it out there because I know I could take it down, and then she gave me her blessing. So that was amazing. And then, I put out an article about my grandfather, that some other family, about comparing him to Donald Trump and being a grandiose narcissist. My grandfather was a real estate mogul. He played on the golf course and the tennis court, and he made deals, and he lived in Manhattan, and he was a womanizer, and he used self-tanner, and he turned orange, and all of those things. And I think he really was a narcissist. And I wrote an article about that, and some family members were not pleased. And I had to say, well, this is my experience. This is, and I'm sorry. I hope that, you understand that this is, and I decided to not use the last names, and where I took that down. And, but yeah, that's the hard part of memoir. There's some, or essayists, there's some people that will take it and say, like, for example, when you talked about your daughters, did you ask their permission? I feel like I have to ask permission of my kids now if I even want to post a picture of them on the internet. So it's definitely tricky. And I am very grateful that my mom is allowing me to tell this story.
Yeah. Family stories are just fascinating, because there was a recent podcast episode I had listened to and talking about this, and a lot of epigenetics came out as well, and the impact of revealing the generational stories to help us understand patterns. And every family has them. And it's fascinating too, as how different family members have different perspectives on the same story. And, even like my siblings and my sister and I are 10 years apart. My brother and I are 7 years apart. I'm the youngest, and I grew up in a very different family than they did, because they grew up mom, dad, 2 kids. I grew up pretty much the majority of my childhood was just my mom and my brother. My sister was off to college, and then, my parents had divorced and my dad had died. And so even within the same family of origin, 2 completely separate experiences. And being so young during my parents' divorce, and so young when my dad died, I don't even share in some of the same traumas. And yet it affects me, but those weren't my memories. And I find it fascinating, even in the exact same family, where our role is and how it gets uncovered impacts our overall experience of it and our ability to relate to each other sometimes.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing that I found about writing too is that, like, your memories sometimes, they form different meanings the more you look at them. And then what's been an amazing, I would say almost like exercise, is writing about my grandparents, writing about my mom, and seeing them as 3D characters and understanding from where they come from. And it is a privilege. You mentioned that it is a privilege to be able to examine it, because if you're adopted, you don't have any of that family history to look at. Maybe you can get your DNA tested and see from maybe what region your family came from, but there's not specific stories. And so I look at it as a true privilege to have gotten my grandfather's manuscript, and to be able to, like, kind of set me on this journey to look not just at my family tree, but like really from where the trauma stemmed from.
You mentioned that you are big into mental health advocacy and do work and talk with, do you say middle schoolers?
And high schools, yeah.
And high schools. What is it you want kids to hear? So for those who are parents who have kids that age, what is something that parents would be helpful for them from your perspective of what it is that, and what you're going in and doing teachings and trainings on? What do you think is one of the most important things for parents to know around mental health and middle school and high schoolers?
Well, there's so much, but I'm going to start with the fact that the earlier you catch it, the better. And I always talk about, like, if you break an arm and you're 14 years old, you break your arm, it's going to heal in like a week with a cast on, right? Imagine if you don't get it set though, and how that can cause problems down the road. Or you break your arm and you're much older, it's going to take longer, right? So the earlier we catch, the better. Mental health is health. It's just as important as our physical health.
Period.
And
same, yes.
Period. and also mental health affects our physical health, vice versa. So we want them both strong. And we talk about coping mechanisms. We talk about warning signs, what to look out for. There's severity, there's duration, because everyone's going to feel a little anxious. Everyone's going to feel a little sad once in a while. It's when it's going on for too long, and the severity. And we talk about asking for help is so brave. That means you're not willing to give up. That means that you're fighting for yourself, and how they can help friends. And then we also talk about suicide, because suicide is not one of those things that, you go and reach out to a counselor. It's one of those things. It's a true emergency. It's not just a red flag. It's like a blaring siren, and how you either call, which thankfully very soon will be the 988 number. Maybe it will be by the time this comes out, which is the same number.
I've never heard that.
Oh, okay. So this is so great. 988 is going to be the new number that you call instead of 911 if there's an emergency that's mental health related. And on the other line will be social workers and people that can answer questions and help and get you the help you need. And God forbid you need to be hospitalized, or they're concerned if you have a plan, an ambulance or a police car does not pull up, which we know can escalate further into issues. A social worker, maybe if they need it, a van that's like equipped with like, I don't know exactly, but not feeling like an ambulance. And I think that's going to be game changing, because as you know, imagine if you're in a psychotic state and a cop car comes up with someone with guns and handcuffs, as opposed to someone in street clothes that's used to helping de-escalate situations. That's
trained in the mental health profession.
Right? And this isn't the end. I mean, just because you call 988, it's not like the be all end all. We have to find these people that can do it. But I just think it's moving in the right direction. So anyways, we talk about resources and places they can turn to, and normalizing language and using language. And there's so much. There's slideshows, there's videos that other kids that are high schoolers have made, and then they can talk to another peer that has gone through something, so they can see that, look, I was able to ask for help and get help, and still dealing with this, but my life is so much better, that type of thing.
It's so important to continue to have that level of exposure of language and resources and conversation starters, because I know a lot of parents have really, really good intentions and often poor execution in being able to have the tough conversations. And there can even be a fear, especially when it comes to suicidality, of if I talk about it, am I planting a seed, right? And that it's a fear-based, and it makes understandable sense. I have a lot of compassion that if someone's in that situation, they don't know what they can bring up in a way that isn't going to have a negative or opposite effect of the intentions. And one of my favorite ways to help disarm defenses is to simply name up front, look, it's not my intention to scare you by asking this question. It's not my intention to shame you by asking for, name the thing that you're afraid of happening right off the bat. Yeah. And it can disarm the receiver to see, okay, the intentions are pure in wanting to support and help and advocate and find resources or whatever it is that the need might be. But even if it's just opening the door to a hard conversation, and people say, well, I don't know what I would say to my kid. I don't know what I would say to my partner. Great. Say, I'm not sure what to say. And I don't know what to say, and I need to have a hard conversation. Like, that's a great starter for something you don't know how to say it. We don't always have the right answers.
Thank you for saying that. That is something I talk about, because I also do a little slightly different presentation with families and parents. But I say this to the kids and the parents, that you saying, do you have a plan? Or are you thinking about suicide? You're not planting that seed. And I know it's a scary thing to ask, but it's so necessary. And just know that by you asking that, like you mentioned, like I just said, you're not planting a seed, you're potentially stopping an emergency. And suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. people die by suicide because they might be in a manic moment and they want to get out of pain. And then, often people that survive those attempts will say, thank God I was able to live, because I really did want to live the next day, and that's what, just knowing there's no shame, knowing there's hope. Those are really important for kids to heal. And also knowing that, like, having those thoughts, it happens. It's okay. Let's get you some help.
Yeah. It's the same way that, the existence of condoms is not going to promote sex. It's to help prevent unwanted pregnancies and STDs. But, when we're in a fear-based place, we go to that worst case scenario of, oh, well, what if I give them a condom out, or let them know condoms exist? Or there's availability that all of a sudden, teenage sex will run 10 times rampant. And it's a fear-based assumption. And I understand it. And I think when we're talking about mental health, there's no easy rule book to follow. And especially if we have mental health in our own families, it can be fearful to talk about with our children if we haven't addressed it in ourselves.
Right. And the truth is, everyone has mental health, right? And I mean, they sometimes say the statistic is what, one out of every four. It's really almost like 4 out of 4 during your lifetime. You're going to be dealing with something at some point. So you might as well learn some coping strategies. Especially if you're a parent, you're going to want to be able to support your partner or your kids or your parents. So it's so important to have these conversations. And I just think it's great that schools are finally understanding that this is something that, if we keep burying our heads, we have already too many kids dying by suicide now, or cutting or using substances to, self-medicate. So it needs, the earlier, the better.
Yeah. I used to teach mindfulness to kids. I was a school counselor for many years, and I taught mindfulness in the classrooms for 4 years. And I remember thinking, my gosh, if I had some of these tools, because some of the kids were even in preschool, and I would teach them meditation, and the excitement kids would have when I would come into the room, for them to have an ability to slow down and just be, in ways that teachers and administrators are like, oh, they're not going to know how to do that. They're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to want to do that. And it's like, no, they're actually closer to the source of learning these tools than we are as adults, because haven't had as much time to be unconditioned from being with our feelings. Like, we learn how to push it away, deny, resist, ignore, shame, blame, judge, the older we get, right? Kids generally are much more in the moment with how they feel. And if we can keep that awareness and connection to their emotions and have accurate language to name their experience, and that would be something that would help normalize experiences. I would do a simple little exercise with kids in a classroom setting of having them do, like, where are you at right now? Not how are you, because I would explain the context of the question a little bit more for the sake of what I just said, but it's so easy to say, oh, I'm fine. And without actually doing a real check-in, to have them really consider, how am I actually? Like, where am I at right now on this scale? And we would do anywhere from a thumbs down to a thumbs up, and anywhere in between. And I would have them put their heads down as they would put their thumbs up, so they weren't influenced by anyone else's answers. And then when they would pick their heads up, look around. And my first observation would say, would you have been able to guess how someone was just by looking at them? Because sometimes there are people with a thumbs down that look super happy. And it was a reminder of, don't make assumptions, right? Like you were saying, just because you have money or, a career or a perfect family, like perfect in air quotes, right? But like, doesn't mean anything of what you're experiencing on the inside. And the other part of it, if your thumb's all the way up and you're feeling great in this moment, no, it's going to likely move anywhere else on the spectrum, and that's normal. And if it's down, well, it's going to be able to go, like, and knowing that range is just part of being human. And I think now, since we're still living with, coming out of, not really sure the language to put on it, the pandemic, we are in this opportunity, I believe, of a collective, universal humanity, shared human experience. There's no one who's gotten out of this pandemic without some challenges within their own mental and emotional health. right? And now we have this collective shared experience, which every single person on the planet is now interconnected by. So no one can say they've had no mental health challenges in their life if they've had a perfect life, because we've all had struggle that we had not control over. So it's just an interesting universal collective that, we can all harness to say, yes, maybe it's big worldwide things, or maybe it's really, really small stuff. And that's life. How do we learn to live with it versus fight against it or be afraid of it or in shame of it?
I mean, I'm an optimist and very hopeful, and I have to hope that this pandemic has taught us that what's important in life, and ultimately it is our connections with others. It's the love we have for our family and our friends who are like family, and that includes ourselves, the love we have, our self-love, and everything else kind of falls away. I'm going to include pets in that one as well. Doing things that like make your heart happy, and making those priorities and celebrating. And we understand now how, like, when we get to be with our loved ones, how special and how important that is. And so I just have to hope that, now that like seeing our kids back at school and getting opportunities to do things, it's like I realize how important all of that is, and not to take that for granted. And
100%.
and that's boils down to gratitude, which we know is also so good for your mental health. And, and that's, again, a coping mechanism. That's a mindfulness thing. These are all, all kind of come back to the same thing. And I look back, I was very lucky. I discovered yoga when I was in my early 20s. And I think that really just learning how to breathe, as simple as that sounds, it sounds so stupid, but it's so big. Learning how to breathe through anything. It's like, you can't believe what you can handle if you can breathe through it. And stress, we know how bad stress is on our body. And so if you can learn how to get through that through breaths, and then think calmly, and whether it's mindfulness or meditation or whatever you call it, maybe it's not even doing it every day. Maybe it's just doing it when the shit hits the fan. But it just, I was thinking about that the other day. I was so grateful that I learned that skill. That made a huge difference. And I sometimes wonder, like, I wonder what would have happened if my grandma Doris had learned how to do meditation, or was like a yogi, or, do you think she would have felt the need to take pills, or, but by the way, don't get me wrong. My mom has bipolar. She needs medication. It does, and there's no shame in that. There's absolutely no shame in that. But I'm just saying, understanding some homeopathic mechanisms is so helpful. Eating healthy, sleep, exercise, all of those kind of things for your physical health, so important for your mental health. And those are the things that, like, again, back to the question about my daughters, those are the things that I'm able to bring up and talk about why they're so important, right? It's not just, and kids at this, they don't really listen to you, right? Like I'm kind of, it's really fun. I'm at the age now where they're kind of coming out and starting to like say like, oh, okay. And actually listening to me. It's happened. Yeah. It's really great. It's really exciting to be there.
Yeah. I think you'll appreciate this quick little story. When I was teaching mindfulness in the classrooms, after a couple of years, I realized that I was just simply doing what I was trained to teach, but not really connecting with these kids on why it matters. And being in a school setting, I had to be really mindful of my language, and I couldn't call it meditation. And I called it just mindful breathing, because that's all we're doing is breathing on purpose with awareness, right? So I went in one day and I asked every single classroom, if you've been breathing from the moment you're born until the moment you die, why should we practice this? And this one little girl, she was 9 years old, third grade. She said, well, I imagine we practice our breathing for the same reason we have a fire drill. She said, we have a fire drill so we know what to do in case of an emergency. And I imagine we practice our breathing so we know how to use it when we need it.
Oh my God.
Rachel,
out of the mouth of babes. That's beautiful.
I was literally in tears. I'm like, oh my gosh, at 9 years old, she nailed it in a way I had never been able to articulate so clearly. because, when the shit's hitting the fan, your brain actually can't access the tools unless you have a pathway well established of what those tools are that you can draw upon. And man, I thought she is going to be so much more well equipped in her little life starting at 9 years old. And if I had had those tools at that age, maybe I would have lived in less fear and anxiety and wouldn't have had to wait till I was 36 and 37 to start understanding how to not live in a fear-based world and not let anxiety hold me back from living fully. And what a gift. And I'm grateful that I figured this out now, right? Like, better late than never, but wow, like it's incredible. So to advocate and to continue to give the language and the awareness and the tools to the kids, I'm so grateful that they have this ability that we didn't have. And there's no shame in the fact that we didn't have it. It wasn't the culture, right? A lot of my clients will say, well, I wasn't role modeled this. No, of course you weren't. Generationally, that's not what was talked about. And I'm grateful that now it's generationally more of a cultural norm to talk about how we're feeling and what to do with it. And my fiance, his whole work, he's a psychologist, and his whole work is teaching men emotional awareness and language for understanding their emotions, because men have been socialized to be masculine and to shut it down. And his podcast is The Evolved Caveman, because he's wanting to teach men, look, this isn't the way you're socialized. You aren't going to be role modeled this. Your fathers, your coaches, your peers, your teammates, we're going to have shamed you for expressing emotion, and it's normal. So I think there's a big shift in our cultural consciousness to be able to have these conversations on a much more normative levels these days. And I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely. Like, one of my favorite things is to watch my husband with my daughters. And that's because, like, I love my dad very much. My dad knows this. I didn't have the relationship that they have. He's able to be so open with them and loving. I find that, like, and I'm hoping men understand like how amazing it is when you allow that openness and that love, and you find that vulnerability, and you can talk and you can be open. And I love that your fiance is doing that. That's so important. Like, little boys need to know that they're be able to talk about emotions, because as we know, their suicide rate is a lot higher than women's, because unfortunately, they use methods that are a lot more violent, but they also don't talk about things. And so it's so important. It's so important. I think about that all the time. Like, if my grandfather was able to talk about his father dying, or what if his father was able to, like, actually discuss his feelings and speak to a therapist, would this have happened? So that's just boils down to back to the cutting the generational trauma. You can do so much of that just by talking about it, just by naming it.
Giving it space to exist is so healing in and of itself. Rachel, I feel like I could talk to you for hours. I have loved this conversation. How can people find out what your podcast is, or things that you're writing and sharing? What's the best way for people to learn and listen more?
Thank you so much. So my podcast is called Dear Family. And it's called Dear Family because it's really a love letter to our families, our complicated families. And we celebrate our complicated families and finding wellness. And it's on all the platforms. And my website is Right Now Rachel. That's right with a W. And Right Now Rachel with a W is also all my social media channels. You can find me on my website or Dear Family on any of the platforms.
Wonderful. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on today. I really valued our connection and conversation, and I really hope that anyone listening right now has taken what they needed to hear on any of these aspects, whether it's tools and language to talk to teens, language in which to reduce your own shame of your own family patterns, curiosity to understand where you came from. I think there's so much healing that can occur from simply allowing it to exist with curiosity. And I really look forward to one day reading your memoir. How exciting, and congratulations on that ongoing accomplishment and project. So again, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Jory. I also feel you and I could probably sit and talk for hours upon hours. And I love all our connections. And thank you for what you're doing. Enjoy your travels. Congratulations on your engagement. And I look forward to connecting again.
I do as well. All right, everyone, take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat, visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.